There is a new twist at the retrial of Dennis Oland. The judge in the case has dismissed the jury. That means the trial will continue by judge alone. Just to remind you, Dennis Oland is charged with the murder of his multi-millionaire father. Richard Oland was found bludgeoned to death in his St. John office in July of 2011. The Oland family is part of New Brunswick's wealthy elite, you might say. It created Moosehead Beer back in 1867. Richard Oland also built 3 other major businesses in that province. In 2015, a jury found Dennis Oland guilty of the second-degree murder of his father. But a court of appeal overturned that conviction, and here we are. It ordered a retrial. CBC's Megan Fitzpatrick is working on this story. It is a breaking story. Megan, what more have you learned?
Well, we know what happened in the courtroom this morning, Suhanna, is that Judge Terrence Morrison told the jury that the Crown had become aware of some kinds of improprieties related to how the jury members were selected. Now, we don't have further details yet on what exactly those improprieties were, what went wrong with the jury selection, but we know that the judge over the last few weeks has been having some hearings and hearing evidence, and he came back to the courtroom today telling the jury that in the interest of justice, the trial would not proceed with them, with the jury, and that it would continue with the judge alone. So he dismissed the jury, telling them that their services were no longer required. He thanked them for their patience, recognizing that this must be a frustrating experience for them. The trial was supposed to start 2 weeks ago, and at that time, the judge told the jury there needed to be a pause and a delay to deal with some kind of legal issue that had arisen. And again, no details on what that issue was, Suhanna, but that's why the proceedings were postponed until today. And then this morning, that surprising development in the courtroom with the judge saying goodbye to the jurors and saying the trial would proceed with a judge alone.
So what happens next then? Look ahead for me, Megan.
Well, Dennis Oland does remain charged with second-degree murder in the murder of his father. Oland, who was in court this morning, has consented to this new way of doing the trial with just a judge alone. The proceedings will now get underway tomorrow, we understand, with opening arguments, and the trial will go on. But again, this certainly changes the dynamic of the trial, this second trial for Dennis Oland, given that it is not going to be up to a jury to decide whether he's guilty or not guilty, and up to the judge alone. So quite likely the lawyers, the Crown and the defense lawyers, having to adjust accordingly now that this case will be heard just in front of one judge instead of jurors from St. John.
Thanks for that, Megan.
You're welcome.
My next guest has been following this case from the beginning, and the beginning was like 2011. It was a long time ago, but he was at the courthouse this morning when the jury was dismissed. Greg Marquis is the author of Truth and Honor: The Death of Richard Oland and the Trial of Dennis Oland, and our chase team reached him in St. John, New Brunswick. Pleasure to have you on the program, Greg. I want to get right to it. Your reaction when you heard about these jury improprieties and the fact that there was a mistrial.
Well, we've known about it for almost a week, so the jury and the public just found out today. So it wasn't a surprise to people who have been following the case from the inside.
And there are Canadians across the country who have been following the case. I mean, a multi-millionaire, a man who was bludgeoned to death, a son who is accused of committing the crime. It is a story that people are following. Explain to me what you know about why the jury was dismissed.
The issue is a police officer used the wrong type of database in vetting jury members, potential jury members, during the challenge for cause process, which was about a 3-day process where jurors were selected in the courtroom. And that became apparent a few days later. And then it became apparent to the defense, and they had meetings with the judge and the other side. And actually, both sides agreed in the end that the way to go is judge alone, because I think it'd be very difficult to get a jury now. Okay,
I'm still not getting it, though. So they used a wrong database. Why does that matter?
I haven't had a chance to check it, but there's a 2012 Supreme Court case that supposedly sets out the criteria for how the police are supposed to check things like criminal records of jury members and potential jury members. And it's okay to use the National Canadian Police Information Center database and a provincial database, but I believe they used, the officer used an internal database. I don't think it was a malicious thing, but it was a fatal mistake in terms of trying to preserve the this jury and having a fair trial.
Now, when people hear the word mistrial, and I'm one of those because I'm not, a legal specialist or anything, but I automatically think, oh, the trial is done. But it isn't. How does it proceed now?
That's a legal question I can't answer. I'm an historian, a law prof. There wasn't even some agreement as to whether if the trial had started. Today, the judge said that the trial is continuing. Mm-hmm. So the fact, that would lead us to think that the trial's already started. But the opening arguments start tomorrow and the first witness tomorrow. Maybe a legal expert, your person, but it's something that's happened as the trial starts, which means some aspect of the trial itself has to stop. So again,
I'm assuming that it means that this goes before a judge alone. I mean, the brakes don't come on this, right?
Well, another option would have been to get a new jury. I think that was an option too. But given the difficulty in getting this jury because of all the pretrial publicity, at the press conference earlier, Mr. Gould said that this was the most extensive challenge for cause in Canadian legal history, something like that, which means the questions that were put to potential jurors broke new ground. They certainly did in New Brunswick, and it was, that was a result of other pretrial hearings, even to get the questions that were asked, right?
Imagine some of the conversations that are happening between, criminal lawyers at the local pub tonight, huh?
Well, not just that, the public too, because the public in New Brunswick has, pretty strong views on this case, and so it's going to, I think, harden certain attitudes on all sides of that question.
What was the reaction in the courtroom?
Pretty muted. I mean, the jury, for the most part, you think about it, 16 men and women came in. They were expecting to start a 16-week trial. Maybe 2 of them would have been dismissed today. They didn't know until just after 9:35, and less than 5 minutes later, they were told they were being thanked by the judge on behalf of people of Canada and so forth, and sent home.
As I understand it, though, Greg, the defense at the get-go wanted a judge-only trial. There was a news conference they held after that decision from the judge. You were there. What did you hear that stood out?
Well, they went on the attack against the St. John Police Force for the most part, and which really doesn't have any bearing on the trial that's going to come, because the judge is not going to be swayed by that type of perhaps more emotional attack. But it's kind of rare in New Brunswick to have a press conference by defense lawyers like that, with the family standing there as well. So this is an ongoing issue since the first arrest of Mr. Oland back in 2013. The family has proclaimed his innocence, and from time to time the lawyers have. It's kind of standard tactics, I think, with legal defenses to attack the police department.
So your next book could be Truth and Honor and Innocence, or Truth and Honor and Guilt. I know you'll be watching because maybe there is another one on the way. But what will you be paying particular attention to tomorrow as this trial starts again with a judge alone?
Well, we can now report that the judge has allowed all the evidence that the Crown entered the first time to go into this case. So there will be no new evidence, despite the fact that the defense tried to get some of that evidence excluded, including Mr. Oland's statement to the police. But the interesting thing to see what defense witnesses will come in terms of expert witnesses. What tactics will the defense use? For example, will Mr. Oland testify this time? He did last time. I don't think the Crown will have anything new, but they might change their tactics somewhat. The other thing, tomorrow, it's somewhat unusual. The defense has been allowed to make an opening statement on the first day of the trial, which normally doesn't happen. So we're going to hear both opening statements tomorrow and the first witness for the Crown.
I know we'll be watching in our newsroom, and we'll talk again. I want to thank you for your time, Greg.
No problem. Thank you.
Greg Marquis is the author of Truth and Honor: The Death of Richard Oland and the Trial of Dennis Oland, which now continues as a retrial. But we reach Greg in St. John, New Brunswick.